When my father told me to pack my things and leave my room, he had no idea he was speaking to his new landlord. He thought I was just the boring accountant in the family, the one who played it safe while my younger brother chased big dreams. But what he didn't know was that I had been silently building a real estate empire, one that now included the very house he was trying to kick me out of. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about teaching them a lesson they'd never forget. What happens when the overlooked son turns the tables on his entire family? When years of being dismissed and underestimated explode into a moment that will change everything. Stick around because the story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. Pack your things. Your brother needs the space. My father's voice was sharp, echoing through the doorway as he stood with arms crossed. His face carried the same familiar look of disappointment, the one I had seen too many times to count. Behind him, my younger brother Ryan leaned against the wall, smirking like he had already won. Ryan, the golden child. The one who got everything handed to him on a silver platter while I had to work for every scrap of recognition. He was the so-called visionary of the family, the future tech mogul whose 3 failed startups had somehow convinced my parents that the next one would be different. And now he needed a proper office space for his new venture. That office space? My bedroom. I looked up from my laptop screen where the bank's confirmation email still glowed brightly. If only they knew that less than an hour ago I had finalized the purchase of our family home. The very house they were about to kick me out of now belonged to me. But I didn't react. Not yet. Instead, I closed my laptop and kept my voice calm. I'll start packing tomorrow. Dad nodded curtly and walked away, probably relieved I hadn't argued. That was what they expected of me, quiet compliance. I had always been the responsible one, the dependable son who paid his own way, helped out with bills when money was tight, and never caused any trouble. Meanwhile, Ryan went to an expensive private university, burned through our parents' savings, and came running back home every time reality didn't align with his big ideas. I sat there in silence as Ryan strolled into my room moments later, already claiming the space as his own. He glanced around with an air of self-importance, tapping his fingers against the desk. I'm thinking of putting my desk by the window, he mused, eyes scanning the room like he was making a real estate deal. The lighting will be great for my video conferences. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Good thinking. Ryan had no idea that I had been tracking our parents' finances for years. He didn't know about the foreclosure notice I found in Dad's office last month or how they had refinanced the house multiple times, pouring every last dime into his ventures. He had no clue that, while he was busy playing the next Steve Jobs, I had been quietly investing in real estate. I owned 15 rental properties across the city. This house? Number 16. You know, Ethan, Ryan continued, stretching his arms. I get why you might be a little bitter, but this is for the greater good. My business is going to put our family on the map. I nearly laughed. Right? Like the app that failed last year? Or the smart fitness mirror you tried selling? His smirk faltered for a second before he waved a hand dismissively. That was just market misalignment. This time I've got a real plan. Sure. Just like all the others. That night at dinner, the tension was thick. Mom had made lasagna, my favorite, probably as some kind of peace offering for kicking me out of my own room. She smiled at me across the table as if expecting me to just accept it like I always did. We know this is sudden, she said in her gentle but firm voice, but Ryan really needs this opportunity. Like the last one? I said before I could stop myself. Dad's face darkened. That's enough. Your brother has vision. He's building something. You should be supportive. What about my support? I asked, setting my fork down. The money I gave you last year for the mortgage? The repairs I paid for? Mom looked uncomfortable. We appreciate everything you've done, honey, but Ryan has potential, I finished for her, pushing back my chair. Right? I've heard it all before. Dad exhaled sharply. If you can't support your brother, maybe it is time you moved out. Ryan sat there, not even trying to hide his grin. He had one, or so he thought. But I just smiled to myself because in 3 days everything would change. That night, I sent a message to my lawyer, Michael, confirming that everything was finalized. We agreed to meet at the house Friday at 6 in the evening. For the next 2 days, I packed my things quietly, letting them believe I was preparing to leave. Ryan started moving his stuff into my room early, bringing in expensive new tech equipment that he'd undoubtedly bought with our parents' credit card. Mom and Dad kept their distance, avoiding confrontation. They thought they had done the right thing. They thought I would just accept it like I always did. They had no idea. Thursday night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Ethan seems to be taking it well, Mom said. He understands it's for the best, Dad replied. Maybe this will push him to finally do something more with his life. Ryan chuckled. Yeah, he should stop playing it safe and take some risks. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening, a slow smile spreading across my face. They really had no clue. Friday morning, I woke up early and dressed carefully, business suit, polished shoes, everything I had never bothered to wear around the house before. When I walked downstairs, Mom blinked in surprise. You're dressed up, she said hesitantly. Big day at work? Something like that. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. But instead of heading to the accounting firm where they thought I still worked, I met up with Michael to review the final paperwork. By 5:45 in the evening, I was back at the house. Mom's car was in the driveway along with Ryan's latest luxury purchase, an overpriced Tesla he could barely afford. Perfect. When I walked in, I found Ryan directing movers as they carried my bed into the garage. Oh good, you're back, he said, not even looking guilty. I went ahead and got things started. Hope you don't mind. I adjusted my cuffs. Actually, I do. Something in my voice made him pause. Mom came up the stairs, concern in her eyes. What's wrong? I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. I think we should wait for Dad. Michael is on his way and we all need to talk. Ryan frowned. Who the hell is Michael? The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Michael standing there in his tailored suit, briefcase in hand. He nodded at me before turning to my mother. Mrs. Carter, my name is Michael Grant. I'm Ethan's attorney. We have some urgent legal matters to discuss regarding your home. Mom paled. Attorney? Ryan's smirk vanished. What the hell is going on? Dad's car pulled into the driveway. I exhaled slowly. This was it. Everything was about to change. Before we continue with the story, I want to connect with all of you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. I'd love to see where everyone is tuning in from. Ryan frowned, glancing at Mom before turning back to me. What the hell is going on? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood there, completely calm, watching as the reality of the situation began to sink in. A car door slammed outside. A moment later, my father stepped through the front door, still in the process of removing his jacket. He paused, his eyes darting between Mom's pale face, Ryan's bewildered expression, and the man in a suit standing beside me, briefcase in hand. Ethan, what's going on? Dad's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. Michael stepped forward, professional and composed. Mr. Richard Carter? My name is Michael Grant. I'm Ethan Carter's attorney. I'm here to discuss the legal status of this property. For a split second, there was silence. Then my father scoffed. Attorney? You've got to be kidding me. Ethan doesn't have the kind of money to hire a lawyer. I met his gaze steadily. Actually, Dad, I do. And not just a lawyer. I own this house. The room seemed to freeze. Ryan let out a short, mocking laugh. Yeah, right? You? Own the house? Please. You're just a boring accountant. Michael didn't waste time. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents, placing them neatly on the coffee table. These are the official legal records confirming that Ethan is now the rightful owner of this property. 3 weeks ago, this house was foreclosed on due to unpaid mortgage debt. Ethan purchased it at a foreclosure auction. A heavy silence followed. My father snatched the papers, his face paling as he skimmed through the documents. Mom covered her mouth with her hands, shaking her head in disbelief. No, this can't be true, she whispered. Ryan, however, refused to believe it. This is bullshit. There's no way you had enough money to buy a house. How the hell did you? I shrugged. While you were burning through our parents' savings on 3 failed businesses, I was working, saving, and investing. I own 15 rental properties across the city. This house is number 16. My father's grip on the papers tightened. His expression was a mix of shock, anger, and something else, something I had never seen before. Recognition. How long, he asked, his voice rough. How long have you been doing this? I crossed my arms. 6 years. Ryan's face was red with rage. So, what? You're kicking us out now. I shook my head. No. I'm not heartless. But things are going to change. This isn't your house anymore. It's my property. And if you want to stay, you'll sign a legal lease agreement. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Ethan, you can't do this to your own family. I let out a small, humorless laugh. Family? A family doesn't throw their own son out of his bedroom like he's nothing. A family doesn't take his money for the mortgage and then pretend like it never happened. My voice was firm. But you're right about one thing. This isn't personal. It's business. Michael slid the lease agreements across the table. These are the terms. The rent is set below market value, but it's a legally binding contract. If you choose not to sign, you have 30 days to find alternative housing. My father clenched his fists, his chest rising and falling with restrained anger. You think you can do this to us? I held his gaze, unwavering. You thought you could do it to me. Ryan smacked the contract off the table, his voice rising. This is insane. This is our home. You can't charge your own parents' rent. I tilted my head. Funny, you didn't have a problem kicking me out when you wanted my room. Why is it only our home when it benefits you? Mom wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. Ethan, please. This is the home we built together. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone steady. No, Mom. It was our home. Then you let it go into foreclosure. I saved it. Now it's mine. My father stood still, gripping the lease in his hands, his knuckles white. He knew he had no leverage, no power in the situation. Michael cleared his throat. The choice is yours. No one spoke. The weight of reality settled over the room. I could see the anger burning in Ryan's eyes, the desperation in my mother's face, and the quiet defeat in my father's posture. I stood there, no longer the obedient, overlooked son they thought they could push around. Now I was the one in control. My father gripped the lease agreement in his hands, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might snap the pen in half. The silence in the room stretched on, thick and suffocating. My mother was still seated on the couch, staring at the papers as if they might suddenly change into something more palatable. Ryan, on the other hand, paced furiously, hands tugging at his hair, muttering under his breath like he was trying to process the impossible. This is ridiculous, Ryan finally spat, shaking his head. You can't actually expect us to pay rent. This is our house. I folded my arms across my chest. No, it was our house. Then you let it go into foreclosure. My voice was even, measured. I didn't create this situation, Ryan. I just took advantage of the opportunity your irresponsibility created. Dad's head snapped up. Don't talk to your brother like that. I met his glare with unwavering calm. Why not? You never had a problem dismissing me when I was the one keeping this house afloat. He opened his mouth to fire back, but then he stopped. He knew he had no ground to stand on. I wasn't the one who had gambled away my future for Ryan's doomed business ventures. I wasn't the one who had chosen to throw their eldest son out of his own room without a second thought. Ryan let out a bitter laugh, throwing his hands in the air. So that's it? You're turning into some kind of corporate landlord now? What's next? Eviction notices taped to our bedroom doors. I didn't respond right away. I let the weight of the silence press down on him before I finally spoke. I don't want to kick anyone out. I want you to take responsibility for the choices you made. I could have let the bank sell this house to a stranger. Someone else wouldn't have given you a lease at all. Mom let out a small sob, her hands clutching her lap. Ethan, please. We're your family. For the first time, I felt something tighten in my chest. She sounded so small, so fragile. But then I remembered how easily she had stood by and let them push me out. I had spent years being the one they relied on, the one who sacrificed, while Ryan was always the one they bet everything on. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my jaw. Family means supporting each other. But it also means holding each other accountable. You wanted me out of the house without even a conversation. You assumed I had nowhere else to go. Maybe that's because to you I was never really an equal in this family. I was just the dependable one who didn't need anything. Well, that's over. Dad exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. We never meant. Didn't you? I interrupted. Because it sure felt like you meant it when you told me to pack my things for Ryan. No one spoke. Ryan crossed his arms, still defiant. You know what? Fine. Keep your damn house. I don't need to stay here anyway. He turned to her parents. Neither do you. We don't need to take this crap from him. Dad's expression flickered, and for the first time, real hesitation crept into his eyes. Mom looked between them, looking lost. I took a slow breath and stepped forward, looking at them both. I'm not trying to punish you, but I'm not going to let you walk all over me anymore. If you want to stay, you sign the lease. You'll have lower rent than anyone else would get in this market. You'll have stability. But if you walk away from this, you're on your own. Another thick silence. I could see the gears turning in my father's head. He didn't want to accept this, but the reality was there, in black and white, on the papers in front of him. The same house he had ruled over for decades wasn't his anymore. He was no longer the one in control. Finally, with a slow, reluctant movement, Dad reached for the pen. Mom gasped quietly beside him, but she didn't stop him. Ryan stared at him, horrified. Dad. No. But Dad didn't look at him. He stared straight ahead at the paper, then back up at me. His voice was low, defeated. You're not giving us a choice, are you? I shook my head. No, Dad. I'm giving you a chance. He inhaled deeply, then, with shaking fingers, signed his name. Ryan's fists clenched at his sides. I can't believe you're going along with this. Dad turned to him, his voice suddenly sharp again. And what the hell do you expect me to do, Ryan? We have nowhere else to go. For the first time, reality finally seemed to sink in for him. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me, then at the lease, then at Mom. Then he shook his head and stormed toward the stairs. Screw this. Mom wiped her eyes and reached for the pen next, her hands still trembling. She hesitated for a second, looking up at me with watery eyes. Ethan, I just wish we had seen you for who you really are sooner. I swallowed hard, feeling the faintest sting of emotion creep into my throat. But I didn't let it show. I guess now you finally do, I said quietly. She nodded, then signed. And just like that, everything changed. The power dynamic had shifted. The family that had once dismissed me was now living under my roof on my terms. I picked up the lease agreements and handed them to Michael, who slid them neatly into his briefcase. He gave me a small nod before looking at my parents. You'll receive a copy of the signed documents. Rent payments will be due on the 1st of each month. Any maintenance requests should be submitted through the tenant portal. Dad let out a bitter chuckle. Tenant portal. Jesus. Michael ignored him. If you have any legal questions, feel free to contact me. With that, he gathered his things and headed for the door. I followed him, shaking his hand at the entrance. Thank you, I said under my breath. Michael gave me a knowing smile. You did what had to be done. I closed the door behind him and turned back to face my family. My mother was still dabbing at her eyes. My father sat stiffly in his chair, his expression unreadable. And Ryan, well, Ryan had locked himself in what was now his bedroom, refusing to come out. I exhaled slowly and ran a hand through my hair. For the first time in my life, I had won. But for some reason, it didn't feel like victory. The days that followed were tense. No one spoke much at first. My father kept to himself, reading through the lease agreement multiple times as if trying to find some loophole that would reverse the reality he now faced. My mother, still adjusting, spent most of her time tidying up, cleaning the already spotless kitchen, reorganizing the cabinets, as if keeping busy would somehow make everything feel normal again. And Ryan, he barely left his room. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace in my own home. Not because I had won some battle, but because, for once, I wasn't the one being taken for granted. I had drawn a line, and they had no choice but to respect it. A week after they signed the lease, I sat at the dining table, reviewing financial reports from my other properties when my father walked in. He hesitated before sitting across from me, clearing his throat. I checked the market, he said, his tone gruff but not hostile. You're charging us way below what you could. I glanced up, nodding. I know. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. Why? Because despite everything, they were still my family. Because even though they had pushed me aside for years, I wasn't about to do the same to them. But I didn't say that. Instead, I shrugged. It's fair. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he gave a small nod. You did good, Ethan. The words caught me off guard. I had spent years being dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. I never once expected validation from him. And yet, here it was, begrudging, reluctant, but real. The moment didn't last long. Ryan came storming down the stairs, his phone clutched in his hand. This is insane, he fumed. You really expect me to pay rent? Me? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. That's usually how it works when you live in someone else's house. Ryan scoffed. This is my house. You just bought a piece of paper. Dad let out a sigh, shaking his head. Ryan, drop it. No, I'm not just gonna sit here and then leave. The words came from me, but the weight behind them landed hard. Ryan stopped mid-rant, his face twisting in disbelief. You're serious? I nodded. If you don't like it, you're free to go. No one's forcing you to stay. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might actually walk out. But then his shoulders slumped, and he let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. He turned away, muttering under his breath as he disappeared back upstairs. I let out a slow breath, watching him go. My father leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. He's got a lot of growing up to do. I smirked slightly. Yeah, he does. There was a long silence before my dad spoke again. Maybe we all do. For the first time, I thought he might actually be right.